All right, well, welcome back to the Minnesota Fringe Festival 20th Anniversary Webcast interview series. And right now we are talking about the Leah Cooper era Onstage. And I am particularly excited for this because this is the first era in which I can truly participate, since 2004 was my first Fringe Festival. So hopefully there's some more shared touchstones and less of my combing through old programs and trying to figure out what was going on. But to kick us off, why don't we just go down the line and give your name and the first Fringe Festival show that you were involved in.
So, Laura Nemi, first Fringe I was in was actually 1996. I was in Maiden Voyage with Cheap Theater, and I directed Jim Bartlett in some show about that architect guy.
Architect guy, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Frank Lloyd Wright.
The only
that architect guy. the architect guy.
And the title just escapes me at the moment. But
Just shout it out when you remember.
yeah.
Or just make one up.
Yeah.
Stuart Holland. And I didn't do a Fringe show until 2003. And that was Mrs. Calbeach's profession, and I was the producer, and it was a one-person show.
Zach Curtis. I did my first Fringe in 1999. I did a solo piece called War Golems that my father wrote, that I did under the auspices of 50-Foot Penguin Theater, which is what most of my Fringe experience was. And Matt Seipel directed that.
My name is John Ferguson. The first Fringe I did was 2002, and that was a show that we premiered in Edinburgh at the Edinburgh Fringe, and then we toured across Canada and North America and came to Minneapolis and did it here in 2002. No, we did 2001 in Edinburgh, 2002 here.
Which show was this?
It's called Shakespeare for Breakfast.
I think I'd like to kick things off with you, Zach, because I was
Start
combing
strong.
through. Yeah, it's like I was combing through all my research for this, and I found your show descriptions for 2003 and 2004. And in 2003, you included the phrase "a searing look at one soldier's tour of duty in Vietnam." And in 2004, you included the phrase, "a vengeful plan to kill the last living Macduff, an anxious American named Charlie, goes terribly awry." And the reason I wanted to single these out is because they seem really emblematic of the sort of genre leaping that happens at Fringe, of something that's very sort of dense and intense and immediately following it up with something. I did not see either of these shows, obviously, but something that appears to have been very farcical.
Yeah, we considered that every year, 50-Foot Penguin used to produce throughout the year, and we focused on doing what we would call, contemporary classics. We focused just on the 20th century, on mostly American playwrights, and did things that are now, 50 years old and starting to become absolute classics. So the Fringe was the chance to just do the stupidest stuff we could find, the most ridiculous things.
Well, this segues into something I want to talk about. This is for the table. I'm pitching this to you, but it's for the table. But your experience genre hopping at the Fringe, going from something dark to something silly to something. Do you feel like audiences are willing to follow you, or do you feel like you get resentment from audiences when you do this? I mean, what was your experience specifically going from between two such dramatically different?
I felt like people were willing to try, and I think if you succeeded one year, they were willing to give you the benefit of the doubt the next year, even if it was a change, because they thought, well, I know this company did something I liked, they must be able to do that again. Whether or not you were was up to you, but I think that was the best way to do it. If you deliver the same exact thing every year, then people go, well, I've seen that, I'll try something new. If you try something new every year, you're the new thing, no matter how long you've been there.
Let me swing this over to you, Stuart, because and again, everything I know is cobbled together from old reviews and programs.
Right.
But you played a character called Mrs. Entwistle Calbeach.
I did.
I believe had experienced a number of lives who have been developed through a number of different places and mics, and I was wondering if you had any insight as to your experience developing that character at the Fringe Festival as opposed to
I started developing the character actually at Patrick's Cabaret.
Yeah.
And I did about 4 or 5 different 15-minute stints at Patrick's. And one of the reasons why I decided to do the Fringe and to bring Mrs. Cowbeach there was to see if I could write and perform a 1-hour show in which it was just me. And I did, and I thought it was a great success. It was a difficult venue because we were over at the Pillsbury Theater, which was a long way away from everything else that was happening. So we didn't get quite the audiences that I would have liked. It's a nice place to work. It actually is. You know?
Well, and that's back in the day, that was a lot harder. Now people will commit more to a space if they know they have the time. But at the time, if you were isolated, you had to really work to get people over.
So when you were at Pillsbury, I was at Heart of the Beast doing the show. And,
way off of the
Same
track.
sort of
Yeah.
Same, yeah, right. People who got tired of going to Pillsbury would stop at Heart of the Beast.
Right.
And do you guys think that attitude has evolved at the festival? That people are more or less willing to sort of go off the beaten track?
What's really interesting, well, I mean, now you hear people, you know, the last couple of years, people would complain about Gremlin. You know, it's so far away. You know, so, I mean, there are people who just want, you know, it's like, oh, I'm going to go to the Rarigan, I'll be there all day long. And it's kind of like, well, you're kind of missing the point.
Although there is something to be said about someone who says, this is the one show I want to see, but it's way over here, and I'm not just going to go to that show, I'm going to go see those 3 shows because I don't know anything about those 2 shows. That's, to me, more important for the Fringe, is people who walk in and go, I had no idea what I was about to see. I just sat down and it happened and I loved it and I got to see that. And that doesn't happen. That happens more now, I think, than it used to. Back in the day, it used to be more of a it used to just be more of a your show's over there, and I want to see 3 things tonight, not 1. There are 3 things. I don't know what those are. You had to really work to get people to.
Well, there was a time when you could stroll around the sort of Wedge area or Uptown area,
Or the
Loring
West
Park, and you could sort of, you know, see a lot of things. And
Right.
that's when I first came here. I remember walking up and down Lyndale from Loring down to Lake Street and seeing, you know, lots of venues around there, and that was my first experience. So it's kind of romantic, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the best way it was, you know. But it was nice to kind of walk up and down that street and really see lots of things.
There was something about the shift, and I think it was Dean that moved the whole thing down to Loring, and that first couple of years of that, where you could and you would see people running in those 10 minutes,
Yes.
because it became a thing that everything was within each other's place. So you really could go to any 2 venues in a row, and you saw so many people. Now it's, you know, with it more spread out, I mean, it still works, but it lost that sort of feel of the immediacy of it. Around each theater has that feel, and around a couple theaters are close.
It's quite a lot bigger now, though, too. Isn't it? I mean, compared to 2002, 2004, it's a lot bigger festival.
Well, let me swing this over to you because we haven't heard from you.
Just like to be a dummy.
Because your big show was Please Don't Blow Up Mr. Boban, which I did not see, and to this day I still get crap from people for having missed. So it's something that still comes up in conversation.
That was the first show that I made when I had just moved here from England. I had visited, like I said before, with a show, and then I brought another show in 2004, I think it was, and then I moved here in 2005 and collaborated with Live Action Set and Noah Bremer. We made Please Don't Blow Up Mr. Boban at the Soap Factory. So that was, what was the question?
It wasn't a question.
Yeah.
It was,
Talk about that.
Well, no, it was.
But that was a bring your own venue experience.
It was a bring your own venue.
Yeah.
Soap Factory.
Soap Factory, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
We actually made the show on the 3rd floor, and at that point, I don't know what it's like now. I haven't been back in a while, but the 3rd floor was just totally derelict and empty, and it was a great place to make that show because it had the right atmosphere. And then we did the show downstairs in the bigger space, and I remember making that show and looking across the river and seeing the new Guthrie being built, and that, you know, we were in this sort of ramshackle building and seeing this big beautiful place being built. It was an interesting situation, but I've learned recently that lots of folks who work at that building came to see that show and really enjoyed it. So, and they were very supportive of it. So that was an interesting experience. But at the time, I was like, "Come on, guys, I'll show you!" Right? And now I've learned that they, you know, really supported it. So that was a great experience to come here and do that show and feel like, and have, you know, artistically and critically and from the audience a lot of great feedback and a lot of love. And it's really what I wanted, because when I came around in 2002 with that show, I just fell in love with the city and with the Fringe, and I felt, I could spend more time in this city for sure.
Because that was definitely a question. Because again, I was in my research, I found your bio. John Ferguson is from Durham in the northeast of England. He trained at Middlesex University on
This
London.
is a very hybrid Geordie accent I have.
Yeah, I was gonna, but how the hell do you end up in Minnesota?
I brought the show, and I met my wife. I met
Yeah.
Megan Odell, who's now my wife, and I also I met her and fell for her, and after some time.
And
But
was it the Fringe that you brought a show to, or was it a separate event?
I had met her in 2002,
Right.
and then all that time was spent trying to get back here.
Yeah.
I brought a show in 2004, and actually Leah Cooper and Dean were letter writers for my visa to come and live here.
Oh.
So I owe the Fringe and those guys a lot.
Well, let me throw out a last question for the table here. Is there any respect in which you feel? I mean, how do you feel alternate timeline story? How do you feel that your life or career would have shaped up differently without the festival, or not shaped up differently?
So for me as a storyteller, I'm absolutely committed to Fringe festivals, because the kind of story I want to tell, the kind of work I want to do, is well suited to Fringes. And the traditional storytelling festival, they get very nervous at the prospect of having me on stage telling the kinds of stories I tell here. And so for me, it's and again, if going back to the spoken word piece, the very first spoken word piece in 2001, I started telling an episodic story, right? Fata Morgana, and it was 16, 15-minute segments, right? And the story that I'm performing, the show I'm performing at the Fringe this year, right, is Fata Morgana as a 1-hour solid story, and it's only taken 12 years to get from there to here.
Wow.
I would say that when I came into the Fringe in the late '90s, there was not the sort of explosion of small theater groups that there's been in town.
Right.
And there were many less shows. It was 50, 60, 80 shows maybe. And most of the companies, if there was a theater company doing a show, they were a theater company that was doing a show for the Fringe. And now there's a lot of companies that suddenly appear for the Fringe, and you never hear from them again unless they do more Fringe work. So at the time, the Fringe for small independent theaters in town was really a way to try to do something different, as opposed to, let's do a show. We were doing shows. We were doing shows anytime we could, but we weren't doing that kind of a show. And it really made us work outside of our comfort zone, and it made us attempt something we hadn't done before, which then we brought back to the rest of our year and said, how can we do this better? And then each time we came around, all right, now what do we try? It's the genre hopping thing. And I feel like now it's more that companies exist for the Fringe as opposed to do the Fringe,
But it was an effective laboratory for you as well.
Absolutely.
You have any thoughts about it?
I think that doing the one-person, 1-hour show that I did for the Fringe was great for my self-esteem. I had never been in front of an audience by myself for 1 hour before. And since that time, I've done a number of 2-hour shows by myself. But the 1 hour, it was like a breaking point for me. And I got to the point where I thought, I can do this.
And do it well.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I wouldn't be living here, and I wouldn't be married to my wife, Megan Odell, and I wouldn't have, well, that tends to happen. We have two kids. Thank you, Leah Cooper. She can babysit whenever she wants. But also, it's really been a place since 04, 05, and through. I did a lot of teen shows as well, like 07, 08, and 09. A place to experiment, and a place to do things. I wouldn't say I do things differently at the Fringe than I do normally. I'm not at the Fringe, but I know that I can push the envelope a little bit more and experiment a touch. But it's also allowed me to just develop as an artist. And I think whenever I'm having success in the theater, which is hit and miss sometimes, I owe a lot to the Fringe as a place where I've been able to learn by doing a lot.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you all for joining us, and please stay tuned for our upcoming podcast. I believe our next one will be talking to Robin Gillette and her team. So stay tuned for that, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.